We are Anka. Stay tuned for updated real news.
Hello, Anka Daily News viewers. Today we'll talk about striking events in a neighbouring country. In Georgia, the streets are in motion and the protests are targeting a leader whose name we hear more and more often every day. Vladimir Putin. The Georgian people are openly expressing their views about Russia's policies in the region and its attempted invasion of Ukraine. This time, however, the situation hasn't been limited to a mere reaction. Street demonstrations have turned into serious confrontations. The protesters have clashed with the police and are determined to raise their voices more strongly against Putin. So, what sparked these protests? Are the protesters in Georgia sending a message not only to their own country but to the entire region? And most importantly, how will these developments affect Russia's influence in the region? While seeking answers to all these questions, we'll also take a closer look at what the events in Georgia mean for the international arena. Today we'll examine why Putin is facing such a strong backlash in Georgia, what's going on behind the scenes of the protests, and how these events may affect regional dynamics. We'll assess what motivated the Georgian public's support for Ukraine and what measures these anti-Putin protests send to the Kremlin. The images emerging from the streets of Georgia in recent days have gone beyond a purely regional movement. The demonstrations are being carefully monitored both by the Georgian government and the international community. There's a widespread view that this popular reaction is not just a protest, but has a broader meaning. People in Georgia believe that not only Ukraine, but also their independence and democratic rights are at risk. That's why crowds have taken to the streets both against Putin's policies and to send a message to their own government. We'll now analyze the details and developments of these important protests. We'll try to understand what the events in Georgia mean for other countries in the region and how this anti-Putin movement resonates more broadly. Don't miss the stunning details of what's happening behind the scenes. Before we get into our report, though, a small reminder. The Anka Daily News team is definitely real. None of my team members or me are artificial intelligence. Even though AI is very advanced, it's still not as good as us. By the way, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our daily reports and explanations. We do read all the comments you leave on our videos, so please continue to share your ideas about our content. Tell us what content you'd like to see on the Anka Daily News channel. And now let us begin if you're ready. Anka Daily News reports. Tensions are rising in Georgia. The streets of the capital, Tbilisi, are witnessing public anger following the suspension of the European Union membership negotiations until 2028. The protests have been sparked by accusations that the ruling Georgian Dream Party is pro-Russian and has taken controversial decisions regarding the EU membership process, as the demonstrations quickly turned into clashes with police allegations that the demands for democracy are being suppressed with harsh interventions are occupying the agenda. While the protests were sparked by the decision to halt the European Union accession process, underlying tensions run much deeper. Following the European Parliament's condemnation of Georgia's recent elections, the debate over democratic backsliding and growing Russian influence in the country has reignited. While EU officials have been severely critical of the Georgian government, the political crisis in the country is deepening. According to the Internal Ministry, at least 43 people have been detained so far. The independent news agency Medusa has reported that the police used water cannons, tear gas and pepper sprays to disperse demonstrators. The demonstrations turned chaotic late on Thursday as the crowd tried to enter the parliament building. Police forces intervened heavily to bring the situation under control. However, these interventions further fueled public anger. The leader of the Georgian Dream Party and Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze defended the suspension of the EU accession talks as a rejection of blackmail. However, this explanation was not enough to convince either the public or the international community. The Georgian Dream Party, led by Kobakhidze, has long faced allegations of pursuing a policy aligned with Vladimir Putin's interests. These developments in Georgia are further highlighted by the European Parliament's criticism of the elections. Allegations of bribery, double voting, and physical violence against opposition members make the democratic decline even more apparent. The Georgian people are taking to the streets to make their voices heard, to demand an end to such practices and a closer relationship between their country and Europe. However, the government's tough stance shows that it prefers to apply more pressure instead of meeting these demands. President Salome Zurabichvili has been one of the harshest critics of the ruling party's policies and the crackdown on demonstrations. Zurabichvili openly condemned the government's behavior, calling the crackdown on the streets a war against the Georgian people. She described the suspension of the EU membership process as the result of a constitutional coup that has been going on for weeks. One of the most striking moments of the events was Zurabichvili's question aimed at the riot police. Do you serve Russia or Georgia? One of the main elements of the protests is the people's attempt to reject Russia's influence over Georgia altogether. The Georgian people believe that the country's destiny should be shaped by Europe and that Russia's policy, that is, in the region, threatens this future. In this context, any setback in the EU accession process is met with a direct popular backlash. The crisis in Georgia is not limited to the domestic policies of one country. It also has a direct impact on the geopolitical balance in the South Caucasus. It's clear the anti-Putin protests send a strong message both to the countries of the region and to the international community. The people of Georgia are expressing that they're fighting not only for their own country, but also for the people of the entire region, including Ukraine. These developments show that the backlash against Putin in Russia and in neighbouring countries is growing, and that the events in Georgia could pose a serious obstacle to the Kremlin's regional plans. While it remains to be seen how the protests will play out, it's certain that the long-term effects of the protests in Georgia will be felt both domestically and internationally. The protests in Georgia are not only a people's struggle to define their democratic rights, but also an important development that affects regional balances. The people's determined stance against Russia's influence has once again filled the streets of Tbilisi with the voice of the demand for democracy. The fact that the ruling party has suspended the EU membership process and pursued harsh policies despite the public outcry suggests this struggle will last longer. We'll see how events will evolve in the coming days. This righteous resistance of the Georgian people has the potential to be an inspiration not only for their own country, but also for the struggle for freedom of other nations in the region. What do you think? How do you think Putin will be affected by these protests? Is there a chance that Putin will take precautionary measures against these protests? Let us know in the comments. We read and care about your opinions.